Hello there, welcome back to Doing Things with Bart. I am Bart, and right now I've got a couple of talk about it videos that I'd like to start off with. One of which is going to be this one, and I really want to talk about Ryzen X3D. So, for those that don't know, AMD released the Ryzen 7000 series of CPUs before the end of the year last year. And they are good chips. They released the 7000X series, which is like the 7600X through 7950X. The model number denoting how many cores they have. So, for example, the 7600X has 6 cores, 12 threads, and the 7950X is the top of the line with 16 cores and 32 threads. So basically it's like 32 logical processors doing stuff at once. Intel has also released their 13000 series chips, so it's 13600K, 13700K, and 13900K. I'll mention those a little bit here in a moment, but I really want to focus in and talk about the chips that AMD are about to release. So you have the 7900 X3D, the 7950 X3D, and the 7800 X3D. The reason why I mention them in that order is so what AMD is doing is releasing the R9 series X3D chips. That would be the 7900 X3D and the 7950 X3D on the 28th of February. They're going to wait another month and then release the 7800 X3D on April 6th. Now, what's the deal with these chips? Well, first off, X3D is just basically something they added onto the name of these chips to denote that they have what's called V-cache. And V-cache is basically a way to stack extra cache onto a chip by using a process that basically stacks them vertically, if you will, on top of each other. In this article by WCCF Tech, they have a die shot, I believe, somewhere. Maybe they don't. I think this is why I got this window here. Yep. Okay. So you've got the die shot here. Basically, what like if they took the cover off this thing, it's kind of what it would look like, sort of. And basically, you got this rainbow looking strip here. That's the V-cache, all right? And what that does is it enables them to add, for that amount of real estate, a lot of cache. If I look in this article, so let's see if it shows. Yeah, so for example, the 7950X non-3D, the non-X3D, only has 80 megs, whereas the X3D has 144 megs. That's because they're able to stack an extra 64 megs of cache onto one of these chiplets by using this technique. Okay. And what they have found is that this is actually extremely effective for gaming. Video games are kind of typically not very multi-core or multitasking applications. They usually want like a good core or two, and they love cache. So AMD, the original chip they did this was the 5800 X3D from last generation, and it's still one of the top gaming chips out there. I would highly suggest, if you're rocking a what is it, 450, 550, or X570 chipsetted motherboard, and say you've got a 2700, a 3700, what are some of the other chips? You could have a like a 3600X, something like that, I would highly suggest that at Micro Center today you can get a 5800 X3D chip for around $300. And even though that's a dead platform, because that socket is going away, that probably is a good upgrade for you, CPU wise. So if you want to do that and then get an upgrade in GPU, that would go really well together. In many instances, in a lot of various games, especially games that seem to be very CPU intensive, a lot of your MMOs, that sort of thing, it seems like the Vcache does a really good job of enabling those games to run really high, really fast. And in modern gaming, GPUs have gotten faster and faster to now where we have monsters like your $1,600 RTX 4090, which will basically bottleneck any CPU. It's actually bottlenecking some CPUs, even really fast ones, at 1080p. It's such a monster GPU. So CPUs have now kind of become the focal point again of trying to get more frames per second. And I think that, like this chip, the X3D chips really are going to be your fastest gaming chips, more than likely, for a lot of games. Intel has their new 13,000 series chips, which are really good. They're actually shockingly, surprisingly good, honestly. They really gave the normal X chips big time competition. As a matter of fact, I would say probably one of the best deals you could get on a CPU today is Micro Center has the 13600K for $250. That is a lot of CPU for $250. It's half the price of some of the things we're talking here or less. So it's a good deal. The X series CPUs are really good. And really you're not going to notice much difference in these CPUs if you game at, like, say, 4K. Because 4K is the resolution that brings GPUs to their knees a bit. And actually the GPU will again be the bottleneck, not your CPU. Underneath 4K, though, some of these higher end GPUs at 1440p, they won't get bottlenecked, and it depends a little bit on your CPU. In 1080p, like, you need all the CPU you can get at 1080p, frankly. It just seems like that's kind of where we're at right now with a lot of gaming performance. So in order to get more performance, AMD has come up with this Vcache system, and it's very effective. The thing I'm noticing about these chips, though, these new ones, excuse me, is that the 7900 and 7950 X3D are going to come out February 28th. The 7800 X3D is going to come out on April 6th. And what I think is happening here is they're going to try and get the early adopters to fork over the money. I think that these chips are no faster than the 7800 X3D. Why do I think that? Well, rumor mill has it that they're not, and the reason is pretty straightforward. If you look at this, right, so one die has this Vcache on it, the other one doesn't. One consequence of having Vcache that is so new is that it just doesn't clock as high. Like, you can't clock the cores that are attached to that Vcache as high. If you look at the 7800 X3D, they're talking the top clock speed, the boost is going to be 5 gigahertz. So what happens is that Vcache limits the kind of the clocks, like you can't clock quite as high, and as a result, because the 7800 X3D only has one of these chips, each one of these is 8 cores, 16 threads, right? And the 7800 X3D is 8 cores, 16 threads. And that's because it doesn't have 2 of these, it only has 1, okay? And the one it does have has the Vcache. So the result is this only is going to clock to 5 gigahertz, okay? On the other chips, you think, well, what wizardry is this? This one says 5.6 gigahertz, 5.7 gigahertz. That's, if you look down here, you'll notice that that's the same clock speed as the non-XRD versions. Okay? But what's actually happening is these are not the clock speeds of the Vcache cores. These are the clock speeds of the non-Vcache cores. These are clock speeds of the ones that don't have this, okay, and are normal cores over on this other side. Of course, those will clock up the same frequency as they do anyway, because they're this chip. So, what does that mean? Well, what that means is I think that they're not going to be any faster at gaming than this chip. But they're going to cost more because they have more cores. They do have a little bit more cache. And what this is about is because they just have more chips. Like the chips have cache on them, even though they're just regular chips, right? So like you take the 7950X, it does have 80 megabytes, right? And the normal 7800 has 40. Okay? But it has 64 Vcache in the X3D variant. And notice it clocks a little bit lower. So I think that that's what's happening here. I think that this 7800 X3D is going to be just as strong as this in all the gaming benchmarks. And the reason for Vcache is gaming. I don't, or at least I'm not aware of, maybe there's some, crazy use case scenario that I'm not aware of that uses Vcache other than gaming. But as far as I'm aware, it's basically for gaming. That's what it's there for. AMD, I think, made an interesting decision with not including Vcache on both of the, I forget what you call these, CCXs, or both of the chiplets. If they put Vcache on both of these, I think this one and this one, the frequency would have ended up being like 5.0 gigahertz. They wouldn't have clocked higher than these probably. Because I think that's what's going to happen is we're going to see 5 gigahertz off of the Vcached cores. And the result would have been, they still, more than likely, even despite all that Vcache, probably would have only performed the same as this. Because again, we're talking about games that are not multi-threaded usually. They're not using 5 cores or 6 cores. They're using a core or two, usually. That's what this Vcache does. It kind of beefs them up. So I sort of understand now why in the last generation, the only X3D chip they made was the 5800X 3D. And I think that is exactly due to that. So they're doing it with these chips. And I'm very curious to see what the outcome is. I think that there's going to be some folks paying an early adopter's tax are going to get these chips. And this is a very niche user case here, I think. It's either going to be, I'm going to buy it because I have the money and I want it, or the use case, maybe, and this is just maybe, you still want the multi-core multitasking for some sort of creativity, but you like the game and you'd like to have the extra gaming performance. That's the only use case I can figure. And again, I want to be clear. Most of the time when you get to 4K gaming, for example, you crank up the resolution, which not a lot of people do. But if you are one of those folks that can afford this, you may be running a 4K display. I don't think you're going to see much in the way of gains. 4K is just really crushing on GPUs, and I don't think you'll see a lot of gains. Some games I think you will. If you have a 4090 matched with a X3D chip running 4K on certain situations, you probably will. And I would refer you to watch out for benchmarks from various other sites. Hardware Unboxed, Gamers Nexus, UFD Tech, like whatever your flavor of choice of hardware website, YouTube channel. Stay tuned. They got the resources. They're going to get all these parts in to test, right? And the embargo lifts on the 27th. So if you want to be on the lookout for benchmarks for these chips, that's when that embargo lifts. But I'm willing to bet, again, dollars to donuts, that this chip that's $250 less is just as fast, maybe even a tad bit faster, because it's got more, it doesn't have the same amount of chips, cores, but it has the same power budget, which means that maybe it can put a little bit more juice to the same amount of cores, and maybe those cores will stay clocked higher for longer. Maybe they will, clock themselves up a little bit more than these guys, because they're dealing with the same wattage but more cores. Just again, maybe not, but I think they'll be super duper comparable, and I think that's why AMD is not releasing this chip until April. The other piece of this is, will these beat Intel's best? I think that they do. I think these will be the fastest gaming chips you can get. I don't think Intel has anything to really match the 3D Vcache. They came out with the 13900KS, which is a blisteringly fast chip. It can clock over 6 gigahertz on the regular. The problem is, I don't think that's going to be enough. I think this offers something more than just clock speeds. The actual IPC gains of this will be pretty big for gaming specifically. I personally wish that AMD would be forthright about this, but I suspect that they're not going to release benches for the 7800X3D on the 27th. I bet we don't get an embargo lift for that. And I think it will be very purposeful. I think they will leave that out because they want these chips to be what you see being the top dog, and I think they want you to buy these. I mean, obviously, right? I want you to buy my $700 chip instead of the $450 chip. At this point, part of me is kind of grateful that we're getting a 7800X3D. They could have just not produced this. Not want to give them ideas. They could have just not produced this, produced these, and been like, look, see, we're the top in gaming. You just got to buy these. It's really expensive to put 3D cache on here. We just, buy these guys. And I think that would have been a travesty. So that's good. But the bad part about it is I really think, everything feels kind of overpriced right now. But I think with the current CPU prices out there, at least AMD was fair about it. I mean, this is going to be the fastest gaming chip, and they're releasing it for $700. This is the original price of the 7950X, which is about $100 cheaper now. And what I think is going to happen is basically you're going to have to choose higher core clocks across all cores versus having the 3D cache. I think that's the choice that AMD is giving you here. And I don't think that in every situation the Vcache is going to win. I don't think in every situation not having the Vcache is going to win. I think if you're a gamer and you want the fastest gaming chips you can get out there, I think this is probably it. But I think this 7800X3D chip is probably your chip. And I think you'll have to wait till April to get your hands on it. I know that the early adopters will probably hop on these. And I don't necessarily believe they will perform worse than the 7800X3D. They might. They might be faster. Again, this is kind of some speculation, so take it with what it is. But rumor mill has it that these clock speeds are not on the Vcache, which makes total sense. They're on the other bundle of cores, and that's why they're so high. And which the result is, if they only clock up to 5 gigahertz on the cores that have Vcache, just like this only clocks to 5 gigahertz core of Vcache, it's the exact same thing, and it's going to perform exactly the same. Because the game is going to choose those cores since they're the strongest for games. It's going to run them, but it's going to run them at that same frequency with the same cache. So that's kind of my thought on it. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. I would love to build a system with one of these and have a play with it. More to come on this. I bought a new case, and I may actually do kind of a review of it and sort of look at it because I really do like it, and I'm looking forward to transplanting my system. I've got a 5800X, non-XRD, just X, and they're notorious for running a little hot, and I've noticed my CPU temps creeping up on me as time has gone by with a 240 millimeter radiator, so I may I may upgrade that, and that might be something I take you guys along for the ride with me to do. But I got a really cool case, and I'll talk about that. Something else too I'm going to talk about is GPUs and GPU prices. Video cards are ridiculous. The pricing is pretty unbelievable. It has been for a while, and it's just one of those subjects I kind of want to tackle. But I guess this will do it for this video. The key takeaway here, I think, is do not be fooled by this. If you have a use case scenario that is, I want all the cores, but I still want the Vcache to have for those games that specifically like Vcache, awesome. And I think I even heard that there's a way, just adding one more point on here, that you can choose what cores do what. So you won't have any choice of the 7800 X30, and this could be an advantage. But with this, it could be possible that you could say, oh, this game, for example, doesn't care about the Vcache as much. I'll have it use the faster clocked cores. This game loves Vcache. Cool, I'll let it use the Vcache cores. That's totally possible that they could do that. So that's something to be aware of versus this. But that's going to require a working knowledge of the games you're playing and how to set that up versus this just does it right. So anyway, it's something else to think about. But I do think that these will be the fastest at gaming in general, probably over the most amount of games. But I think that your 7800 X3D at 449, that's going to be the best bang for your buck. And it's going to perform basically the same as these guys, I think. So anyway, feel free to comment. Make fun of my ramblings, if you will, or thank me for my ramblings. And either way, no matter what you think, maybe you think these chips suck, that's fine. But either way, have a good day. Enjoy yourselves. Thank you all.